Again, I apologize for keeping you all waiting. Full sweaty jog here. Okay.
So forward, backward, laser.
Gotcha. Thank you very much. All right. So, quick overview of what we're going to be talking about. It's just going to be a general conversation about PV and battery storage. And we're going to focus mostly on battery storage because that's where all the innovation is happening right now. So we're just going to talk about the technology itself and the trends. We're going to talk about who are our customers. More specifically, what are the applications? There are a lot of applications for energy storage, but I'm going to focus mostly on residential and light commercial because that's most relevant to you guys. And then we're going to talk a little bit about integrating solar and energy storage into building design. Just some of the considerations that things that you'd have to take into account if you ever want to make a building PV and storage ready. And then James is going to come and talk about the incentives. So what is energy storage? So like I said, there's a lot of different types of energy storage. On a utility scale, it can be batteries, it can be pumped hydro, it can be a lot of different things. But we're going to focus on lithium-ion batteries. Mostly, so shown here on the left, you'll see a Sony Eco Compact. That's a newer lithium-ion technology that just hit the market in the last quarter of 2016. Everybody, I'm sure, is familiar with the Tesla Powerwall. This is the second version of the Tesla Powerwall. The first version is on the market already. And one technology that I'd like to touch on briefly, because I think it's very cool, is what's called an aqueous hybrid ion battery, also known as a saltwater battery. This one's pretty cool because it is environmentally benign. It is good for low energy, long duration applications, and it's cradle to cradle certified, so it's pretty cool. So we'll talk about that later in the presentation. So, how do we talk about batteries? You'll hear a lot of different things, a lot of different terms thrown around. But the focus, for the sake of this presentation, I just want to talk about when you hear kilowatts, what you're talking about is the power that the battery can put out on an instantaneous basis. So if we're talking about this like you talk about a car, your kilowatts would be like your horsepower. By contrast, kilowatt hours is your power over some amount of time. So it's your energy. And you think of this, sticking with the car analogy, as like your vehicle's range. And we will probably not talk much about C ratings during this presentation, but it is important to note that if you hear about a battery C rating, what it is really referring to is the speed of charge or discharge. C ratings can get a little bit messy. Lithium ions, for example, lithium-ion batteries have 4 different C ratings for different scenarios that would play out with the battery. So the C rating is really embedded in the spec sheet in the maximum amount of kilowatts that it can be charged at, kilowatts that it can output. So yeah. Okay. Again, notable technologies. The reason lithium-ion is such a big deal is because it is has the highest energy density of any mass market viable battery. So energy density being the watt hours per kilogram of the actual cell. Doesn't require a ton of space. A little bit expensive right now, but the price is coming down pretty quickly. And some of the downsides, a little bit temperature sensitive, and it's difficult to recycle right now, unfortunately. However, I think that innovative recycling techniques will come about as the market expands.
Brandon, do you want to take questions as you go, or do you want to go through your material?
I can, whatever you guys want to do. I can bullet through, or I can just kind of,
Mike and I have been instructed to ask a question about the environmental impact of lithium-ion beyond the hard to recycle.
Okay. Yeah. What's the question?
How bad is it?
Can you speak to the environmental impact of mining the materials required for lithium-ion batteries?
Sure. So I don't know a lot about the actual, in terms of numbers, what kind of damage it does. I will say, in broadly, number one, the part that people kind of have a problem with is mining the actual lithium. And it takes place like you mine any other metal in strip mines, and so it does some concentrated environmental damage. Having said that, it doesn't do a ton of damage to the atmosphere in comparison to continuing to use fossil fuels. I've heard estimates it's like 1/10 of the damage, or they get more and more generous, 1/20th of the damage. But it's also important to note that these aren't lithium metal batteries; they're lithium ion batteries. So lithium is only 2% of the cell mass in some of the most lithium heavy batteries. So most of it's like manganese, cobalt, oxide, aluminum, a lot of other metals in it. So there's not a ton of lithium in it, so that's important to know. But it does do some environmental damage. But I think that its benefits offset that pretty significantly. And again, it's concentrated, so it's easier to manage than dispersed damage.
As long as we're not mining it in the United States, we're okay.
Right, yeah, as long as it's somewhere else. It's fine. It doesn't even happen. So in terms of being environmentally friendly, a good alternative is this guy. The aqueous hybrid ion battery. The company that makes them is called Aqueon. They just use normal metals that can be recycled in a typical manner, and the electrolyte is just very salty salt water, and some polymers to hold together. Because it's not a volatile chemical, there's not as much energy density, but they make up for that with lower energy density and a large size battery. The obvious downside is that I can put a lithium-ion battery on that wall, weighs 250 pounds. This thing is, when it's put, its modules are put together, it's pallet size and it's full of water, so it's not going on any second floors. It's really heavy, but it does have some good applications. And again, I can't emphasize enough, it's cradle-to-cradle certified. It's a big deal.
Can you just compare that environmental issue to like standard lead-acid batteries?
Sure. Lead acid can be, there's recycling techniques in place for lead acid. I don't know a ton about the specific recycling techniques, but I know that lithium ion, because the environmental damage would be comparable to lithium ion, but the life cycle of lead acid are like roughly half or less. So over time, you're going to use more lead acid batteries to do the same thing.
Would the lead acid be roughly the same weight as the aqueous?
Yeah, I think so, roughly. Yeah, actually I haven't done the weight comparison, but it makes sense. There's large battery banks with lead acid. They're roughly the Aqueon is a good alternative to lead acid in my opinion. Okay, so I'm going to get into the weeds a little bit in the technology. I won't stay there too long. I just think that it's important to kind of understand what makes up a lithium-ion battery. So the basis for the lithium-ion batteries are these little 18650 cells, cylindrical cells. They're called 18650s because they're 65 millimeters long and 18.5 millimeters in diameter. It's kind of the building block of the technology. And so inside of a lithium-ion battery, like say a Tesla Powerwall, you would have many of these connected in series inside modules like this, and these modules would be connected in series or parallel depending on the application. Whatever power you wanted to get out of it, whatever voltage you want to get out of it. And then they're all packed inside an enclosure, given a cooling system and a battery management system, and that's pretty much it. It's relatively simple technology.
That looks like just like a AA battery.
It's like a enlarged AA battery. So if you see one in real life, they're about this big there. But yeah, it essentially is. So again, really into the weeds here. But inside the cell, you'll have basically an anode layer that is graphite, some sort of electrolytic gel that is your separator, and then a layer of whatever your active metals are. So it would be your lithium ion plus your cobalt oxide and your manganese, or whatever it is, whatever chemistry the battery is your cathode layer. Basically, laid in sheets, rolled up and put in this tube, and then you have a functioning battery. So some common chemistries that you'd run into here are lithium nickel cobalt, you have lithium manganese oxide, and lithium iron phosphate. You don't have to remember the names of the specific metals being used. Different batteries use a different mixture of all of these metals, typically. But it is important to note that that the lithium ion is just an umbrella, and there are different chemistries, and those chemistries are good for different types of applications, different power, different lifespan. And as you can see, so basically what happens is you have your anode, which is graphite, and under charge you would get lithium ions off of the cathode, and then it would reverse under discharge. So, like I said, we don't have to get into the chemistry too much, and I don't really know, actually, because I'm not a chemistry major, so this is as far as I'll go. Actually, a little bit further. I lied.
A quick question.
Sure.
It seems like these small packages, a lot of that is packaging. Why not make it bigger? Reduce the amount of packaging?
Well, that is a good question, and it is something that they're actually, that's some of the battery innovations that have been made, Tesla and Panasonic have come from making this packaging as small as possible. Over-the-counter 18650 cells that you buy for laptops or you buy for any other small electronic would have their own individual safety systems inside of them that would take up some of the so a lot of the space, and they'd have thick polymers that protect the battery from catching on fire, blah, blah. But so when Tesla and Panasonic got together, they eliminated all of those safety features inside of the battery, and they centralized them inside of the enclosure because you have a lot more space to work with. So you still have battery management. The batteries aren't catching on fire left and right. It's just that they centralized it so that they get more energy density out of the cells. It's also, if you are really up on batteries, you'll know that Tesla just released their new, or they didn't release it, but they're talking about their new 2170 cell. It's slightly larger than an 18650, 21 millimeters in diameter, 70 millimeters long, and it is supposedly the highest energy density lithium-ion cell ever created. 50% more energy, according to them, than the 18650s. So, excuse me, we'll see how that goes.
If I can expand on that real quick.
Sure.
So, a lot of batteries have major safety concerns around thermal runaway. So what Brandon's talking about with the battery safety system in Tesla's situation is actually an active liquid cooling system that circulates fluid all around the cells. Other battery manufacturers have different strategies, like NEC, which is a company here in Massachusetts. They have an air-based system. All of them require some kind of breaking down of the mass of the energy into smaller units to avoid thermal problems. And they seem to have done it in a way which is pretty darn safe. I've watched the videos of the fire tests for one of the larger, like commercial size, maybe a third of this room size enclosures full of batteries. They just tried to set it on fire and it self-extinguished. So it's reasonably successful strategy. But you're right that there's all this excess packaging material, and it's not incredibly efficient from a materials perspective. It becomes very heavy and bulky. So we'll see if they can fix that problem over time.
Battery expert. See. So, all right. Again, this is the last couple slides in the weeds. I promise the whole thing will be like a science class, but they have so in a lithium nickel cobalt chemistry. So what is pictured here is on what the cathode looks like on a molecular level. Basically, you have this sort of layered wafer structure, and it holds much more excited particles particles being the lithium ions. So those, and it holds a lot of them. So you can get a higher energy density out of them and higher energy, a higher amount of power output. However, because when under discharge, all of these particles have to make their way through these like waffle-like web structures. There's a lot of resistance, and it produces heat, which reduces the lifespan of the battery. So high energy density, lower lifespan. By contrast, lithium manganese oxide has a relatively lower, listed here specific energy, but that's just another name for energy density, essentially. But on a molecular level, the cathode has these tube-like structures, so there's a very low resistance for the particles when under discharge. So this greatly reduces the amount of heat and resistance, and you get a longer lifespan because of that. Like I said, you don't have to remember all this. It's just important if someone comes to you trying to sell you a battery, and they explain what the, this chemistry does this, that you can be an informed consumer and just say, okay, I'm going to call BS on that, or okay, I believe you. Okay, so why should you care? So as I said, the lithium-ion batteries are coming down in price quite dramatically. Shown up here is the price per kilowatt hour of a lithium-ion battery inside of a vehicle, an electric vehicle power pack. They use the same battery, so it's relevant to the building scale storage as well. And it was right around $1,000 per kilowatt hour for any manufacturer to produce. So they upcharged that. Now, in 2015, 2 years ago, it was just over $200 per kilowatt hour. So it came down dramatically in 5 years. Right now, today, Tesla pays $190 per kilowatt hour for their Model S, and they're expecting to pay a lot less for the incoming Model 3. And GM is rumored to pay about $145 per kilowatt hour for their Bolt. So McKinsey and Green Tech Media both are predicting that we're going to get to this magic $100 per kilowatt hour number by 2020, and I think that it's plausible that it could happen before then, but 2020 seems about right. So this is for sure something, if you're an architect and you are working with new buildings and green buildings, you will almost certainly be asked about batteries in the next couple of years, so it's important to kind of be up on it. So, okay. PV plus energy storage systems. I'm going to talk about kind of the architecture of it right after I get this drink of water. And also, yeah, feel free to just ask any questions in the middle of speaking. Go ahead.
Did you see that special on Nova 2 weeks ago about batteries?
I did not.
I watched it. I thought it was very entertaining. Lots of flashy graphics.
Yeah.
Stuff. But I think there was quite a bit of content to it.
Yeah. I'll give it a look.
It didn't get into the chemistry like you
Yeah, this is as deep as I'm going to go with the chemistry ever going back to the 30,000 feet now. So.
Anyway, it's on.
Yeah.
It's on the PBS website.
Okay. Yeah, I'll give that a look. So PV and energy storage systems. So there are two basic architectures when it comes to a PV system and a battery storage system serving a home. You'll hear them. They're AC coupled, an AC coupled system, and a DC coupled system. There's a lot of nuance to the systems, each specific system, but these are kind of the general architectures of them. So a DC coupled system, you would have a PV array that serves a battery bank, and it's all direct current coming from the PV array into the battery bank. And the charging of the battery bank would be controlled by a charge controller. From there, you'd have a battery base inverter that draws power off of the battery banks and feeds any AC, it converts to AC and feeds any loads inside of your home. There's an important difference to be noted between a battery base inverter and a solar PV inverter. A battery base inverter always, just gives you the amount of power that you need from whatever is being drawn on your loads. So you're not constantly using your battery, because the idea is to try to conserve energy. you don't have a grid to offload excess energy to. So by contrast, an AC coupled system, you would basically just have a normal grid interconnected PV system here. And also, in addition to that, on the AC bus side of the system, you would have your battery bank and your battery base inverter. So in this scenario, you would have DC power coming from your PV arrays, and they would feed an inverter. Inverter would convert it to AC, so you could use it to power your loads. And so you'd feed your loads, it could go back onto the grid, or it could go back, convert back to DC, and keep batteries charged for whatever the application that you're looking to serve is. Like I said, there's advantages and disadvantages to both setups. For example, in a lot of AC coupled setups, the obvious disadvantage is that you have a lot more equipment and you're losing some efficiency when you're going from the PV array to the batteries. But the upside is you have a little more flexibility. So you can use all of your PV power. If you look at this, you kind of, if there's a day where you're not pulling a lot of energy from your home and your batteries are topped up and it's midday and it's like a sunny day, then this charge controller is curtailing the power coming from the solar array, so you're just losing that production. So this is a more efficient system, but you lose production in real time. So, and like I said, new technologies are coming out that are kind of where the inverter acts as both a battery-based inverter and PV inverter. So a lot of these problems are already being solved and won't be a problem in the near future. But it is important to understand because people still talk about AC versus DC coupled. So I'll talk a little bit about solar. If you are designing a building that you think will have solar, or you actually intend to have it put on, before the building becomes occupied, there are some things that you need to take into consideration. There are two basic types of building-based solar arrays. You have roof-mounted pitch roof, shown here, where basically the PV array, the modules are just mounted to the roof on rails. And you have a ballasted array, which is not mechanically attached, it's for flat roofs. And you have basically single rows and these ballast tray in between and 30-plus pound concrete blocks weighing the array down. So some of the considerations. You obviously want it on a south-facing roof if you can. You can also do east-west, but the power yield isn't as good. South-facing is really ideal. It doesn't have to be directly south-facing, but more south is better. You have to ensure that the structure of the roof can accommodate an additional 3 to 4 pounds per square foot. Usually not a problem with new construction. The only time that we ever run into structural issues on existing buildings is with old New England houses typically, or old churches or things like that. You want little to no shading. The minimum amount of shading is the less shading, the better. Ideally, no shading. But if you have a couple of vent stacks on a smaller system, it can be mitigated with microinverters or other types of technologies. But you really don't want any shading. So if you can consolidate any obstructions into one area, that would allow kind of like a vast open area for the PV array, that's kind of ideal. So one thing that's important to keep in mind is that PV modules they come in all shapes and sizes, but they're roughly 18 square feet, usually about 3.5 feet by 5 feet. And this is a big one. If you think there is going to be PV on a roof, it is very helpful if, when the walls in a building are still open, if you can run open conduit from the PV-ready roofs to the utility room. That really saves a lot of labor costs. Even if you're just designing a building where you think maybe in the next 5 years it might have solar, it's helpful, and it's pretty low cost measure to save some money down the road. The last part of it is if you're going to have, if you want the solar equipment to be inside, you have to make sure there's room in the electrical room for that. If you're going to have batteries, you want to make sure there's a lot of wall space for the batteries, lithium-ion batteries anyway. And I put snow management on there. Typically not a problem. There's a lot of products you can buy to keep snow from sliding off onto entryways and stuff like that with solar arrays, but it is something to keep in mind.
Can the batteries be outside?
They can, but it does, in cold climates it's not great. In warmer climates it's okay. I think that Tesla's
in general in New England, most of them can't be put outside unless they have an active temperature management system. So commercial power packs can be put outside because they have heaters and coolers in them. But residentially, pretty much everything has to be inside.
So flat roof considerations. With flat roofs, it's kind of the same thing. If you're going to have a small commercial building that has a flat roof, you want kind of vast open spaces that don't have a lot of obstructions, because if you have obstructions, you're going to have to kind of jog around them. So it's going to reduce the amount of PV production that can get on the roof. You also want to make sure that your ballast systems aren't mechanically attached, so they're a lot heavier. They're 7 to 8 pounds per square foot is what we typically see. You'd like to design for an additional 10 pounds per square foot if you can, and that's kind of like on average. The point loads of these things can be 90 or 100 pounds, so you keep that in mind also. And same thing with the pipe runs. If you can run open conduit and make sure there's space in any electrical room, that's ideal. Other than that, it's about the same.
I would add you also, depending on the jurisdiction, want to check fire code. In DC, for example, you need a 4 to 6 foot setback on all commercial PV installations, which squeezes out some of the smaller flat roofs from being economic.
It's true.
So you got to check your fire codes.
That is true, and that varies from municipality to municipality also. Sometimes we run into issues like that. We typically don't. We typically stay at least 3 feet back from the edge of the roof. And if you have a tall parapet on the roof also, you want to keep your parapets really short. Tall parapet on a small roof just makes solar, if it's blocking sun from the south, then it's going to ruin production. So short parapets also. So here, just for some scale, is this gentleman. I don't know who he is. I found this picture on the internet, but I'm going to call him Chuck. And Chuck is a brilliant scale figure for you guys. To show you, this is just how much space, wall space you'd need for a Tesla Powerwall. This is the first generation of the Tesla Powerwall. The new Powerwalls and a lot of the Sonins lithium-ion batteries can be mounted back-to-back on the ground, so that gives you a little more flexibility. But just like I said, keep in mind, if you want a lot of storage, it's going to take up a lot of wall space. And also, so here are the saltwater batteries, and in what I assume is a finished garage. Sure.
I have 2 questions actually.
Sure.
One of them being the energy density of those is lower.
Yeah.
You mentioned. Do you know as a percentage how much lower?
Not as a percentage, but I can tell you the this pack. This is a pallet, and it's about this 40 inches tall, and this is 26 kilowatt hours of energy. This, if you were to stack, these are about 6.4 kilowatt hours of energy, and the new Powerwall is the same size and has 14 kilowatt hours of energy. So it's significant. There's a significant difference.
And my one more question is
Sure.
the fire code issue. Is that because of something that could malfunction with the panels or some other code?
Oh, the setbacks?
Yeah.
The setbacks is just in case a firefighter had to get on the roof, and they would want space to navigate around the panels if they could. It's not uncommon for fires to originate from HVAC equipment, so you'd want to have paths to get to those as well. so yeah, it's typically the consideration with it. So with the aqueous hybrid ion batteries, again, similar in size and density to a typical lead acid system, you'd have to ensure that you had this kind of space, that it was on a floor that could support, thousands of pounds, and they have to be brought in there with a forklift because it's a pallet. So just kind of spatial considerations to be aware of. So as we were just talking about, fire safety. So the National Fire Protection Association conducted some tests with Tesla on this particular test that's showing is on their Power Pack, which is essentially their utility scale battery it's just 16 power walls just stacked on top of each other. And they did two different types of tests. There are two ways that lithium-ion batteries would typically catch fire. The first one, like Jamie was talking about earlier, is through this process called thermal runaway, and that's when a single one of those little cells heats up, stops working in shorts or whatever the reason it stops working, and it heats up the cells around them, and they move outside of their operating temperature, and they stop working, so they heat up, produce a bunch of resistance, and then the cells around them heat up and produce a bunch of resistance, and you get exactly what it sounds like, this thermal runaway. That's the first way they catch on fire. The second way that they can catch on fire is very obvious if it was just exposed to a direct flame like anything else. So in the thermal runaway test, the NFPA took just a cylindrical fake cell to initiate the thermal runaway, and it put it inside one of the battery packs, and heated it up. And basically what they found was the batteries, the cells rather, it initiated a thermal runaway, but they all kind of popped one by one and heated up, and it kind of slowly extinguished their energy, smoked, but they didn't explode. The cell didn't explode or anything like that. And all of the damage was contained inside of the individual battery enclosures that they put the dummy cells in. It's pretty remarkable. The enclosures do a pretty good job of keeping a fire from spreading. Under the direct flame test, they found, as Jamie was saying, that they will catch fire. They will not explode. They pop, like I said, individually, but they don't go crazy, huge explosions like a lot of people imagine. And when you remove the flame, they just sort of slowly flame out, but they don't produce any sort of accelerated fire risk. And the cells that do catch fire just kind of quickly exhaust their energy. So they're not like a risk after the fire goes out either. So the results were, according to the NFPA, very satisfactory. So it's good, very promising.
What are the sort of temperature parameters to avoid the thermal runaway? How cool do they have to stay? What's their operating temperature?
Their operating temperatures are somewhere between, their absolute minimum operating temperature, I think, is -4 degrees Fahrenheit, and I think the top is somewhere around 120 degrees Fahrenheit, maybe a little more. But the thermal runaway would typically would be initiated by a damaged cell in some way, not necessarily just from the batteries being very hot. And like I said, they all have integrated cooling systems that keep them, even if the ambient temperature is very hot, the cooling systems keep them well within their operating range. And if they if they start to move outside of their operating range, the battery would just shut down well before they would catch fire, I should say. So if they do catch fire because of thermal runaway, that's a defect.
But that's the control system within the box that holds however many of these cells to
right.
make a package.
Exactly. Yeah, and it would just shut the whole thing down.
Are the fumes off of a flame like that particularly toxic? Or?
Probably. I actually didn't. In this test was conducted outdoors. I wouldn't be running around in it, but they didn't mention that it was particularly bad. But yeah, I mean, it's a lithium metal. When it reacts with air, it will produce hydrogen gas. So, it's trace amounts, but you don't want to.
Probably a lot of junk in there.
Yeah, it's probably not great.
That sums it up.
Yeah. So, yeah. All right. So, who are the customers? To talk a little bit. Really, this is just about applications. So the first one that people typically think of is backup power. So let me back up. If you work at a solar company and you are in sales, which I'm sure that you get this all the time, people assume that if they put solar on their house and the grid goes down, that they're going to have power if the sun is out, and everybody else is just going to be out of luck. And they are always incredibly disappointed when we tell them that no, that is not the way that it works. It's a safety issue. You can't have a PV array backfeeding a dead grid when line workers are trying to fix whatever the problem is. So grid interconnected inverters just shut off when they see that the grid is down. So if you are really inclined to be able to use your PV energy, or your energy when the grid is down, backup power is the way to go. So in this scenario, you would have your house with, and it could also be without PV, and you would just be, when the grid is up, you're just getting power from the grid, and you're also charging batteries either through the grid or from the PV, excess PV production, or both, depending on how you want to do it. When the grid goes down, boo, grid, and then you get all this power, and that's it. That's all there is to it. With backup power, they're typically AC coupled systems. We've done one backup system, and I believe it was AC coupled. Just because, if you have an existing PV array and you call and want batteries and an inverter for the batteries, it's just easier to do it that way rather than redesigning the entire system. Okay. So demand charges. Peak shaving to reduce demand charges is one of the best ways that, the most viable ways batteries can be used right now for light commercial applications. So what are demand charges? Well, demand charges, your energy bill is broken into two parts. The first part is your power delivery over time, so your kilowatt hours. If your bill at home is typically just kilowatt hours. But if you have a lot of inductive loads in your building where you're doing manufacturing or like have a sawmill or anything like that, you could also be hit with a demand charge for the peak amount of power that is required to be delivered to your facility in that billing period. This would be your peak demand for this period of time. So demand charges can get quite expensive. Okay, so here's an example of a bill that we were given from one of our customers that does light commercial work. And this is in the kind of off season of demand. This is in the, I believe this is in October. I don't see a date on here. But so you can see that their total energy charges, that is kilowatt hours for this period, is $1,159.01. Up here, you'll see their demand charges. So during that time, in addition to the amount of energy that was required to be delivered to their facility, at some point they required 219.8 kilowatts of power to power whatever sort of inductive loads that they had. Even if this only happens once for 10 minutes out of the course of the entire month, they're still going to get charged for that peak demand. And so it's broken into a distribution and a transmission charge, but it's essentially $16.60 times 219.8 kilowatts. So their energy charge was $1,160. Their demand charge was 3 times that, $3,650, which is insane. And like I said, this is off season. So basically, the utility is saying, if you want to have inductive loads, we have to have capacity to cover you whenever you need that power, and we're going to charge you for it. So typically customers that are hit with demand charges are anybody who pulls more than 10 kilowatts. So it's not really a problem for residential. And this is just kind of a general number. Depends on your municipality or who is your utility. So like I said, that demand charge is relatively low. It was off season. If you see in Eversource's B2 rate, which is a common business rate that we see all the time, their summer peak demand charges are $41.25 per kilowatt. So excuse me. And last point, solar cannot really, doesn't do a great job at mitigating demand, because even if you have a solar array that would, on a sunny day, eclipse the most demand that you would get from turning on inductive loads, it's intermittent and it could miss one. And if it misses one demand peak, then you're still charged for it. So solar's not a great solution for it. Okay. So in comes batteries. Basically, you would want to do what's called shave the demand peaks. So you would set some parameter based on the size of your batteries and based on kind of modeling the system to be optimally sized and priced to reduce some of your demand charges. In this particular case, they limited the demand to 400 kilowatts. And anything over 400 kilowatts, the batteries step in and offset the draw off the grid. So in this case, you would need to have a battery bank that could output an additional 200 kilowatts. It's a pretty significant battery bank for whatever this amount of time is. So as you can imagine, designing a battery bank for peak shaving can be kind of complicated. It really depends on your load profile, depends on how much money you want to spend, how much your demand charges are. It gets kind of complicated, but that is when people are talking about peak shaving, this is what they're referring to. So self-consumption. Self-consumption is the idea of if you have a PV array and you want to keep all of that energy that your PV array produces on site for philosophical reasons, because you're trying to be cleaner, because you can't, if net metering ever kind of is reduced and you want to keep that power on site because it's financially beneficial to do that, or if you want a PV array in your house and you live in Hawaii, for example, and you just can't put any power back onto their grid. Or, again, if you live in Boston, you live in an area network where you also can't put any power onto the grid, but you still want PV, your option is self-consumption. So, on a residential scale, I'm sure a lot of people have seen this, so I'll just kind of speed through it, but basically, in the morning, your load profile typically for a typical home looks like this. In the morning, you are getting ready for work and getting the kids out the door, and you're using a lot of energy. And then once everybody's gone, you're not using very much energy. And then at night, you come home, and you're using a lot of energy again. And then everybody goes to sleep, and your energy demand tapers off. Solar doesn't care about that. Solar just kind of comes up when you're not at home. You're producing a lot of energy, and most of it's backfeeding onto the grid. With net metering, that's fine, because the grid is your battery. You are just putting energy out there and getting credit for it, and when you have to draw it back off, you're paying the same rate that for it coming in as you export it. So, on average, only 27%, for a home with solar, a home with solar only uses 27% of its actual PV production. The rest is net metered. So you're really still using quite a bit of grid power when you actually do the calculation. So if you're using batteries for self-consumption, it's pretty simple. You would just take all of that excess power, and instead of putting it out into the grid, you would put it into your own batteries, and then you would use that those batteries at night and in the early morning when the sun isn't shining to offset your loads. Now, it's important to note that this is not a great replacement for net metering. Net metering is on a monthly basis, and you get to carry your credits through the winter when the solar array is only producing 30 or 25% of what it would typically produce in summer. If you're grid interconnected with a solar array and a battery system, and you have set self-consumption, chances are in the winter you're still going to be drawing off the grid. So ultimately, it still ends up being kind of a reduced payback for solar, but it does have a payback, which is important to know. Okay, last application that I'll go in depth with is time of use arbitrage. There's a lot of talk about switching to time of use rates. More and more utilities are, fond of them. And here's how a battery can help. But first, so what is a time of use rate? Time of use rate is a way for a utility company to charge its customers for energy in a way that more accurately reflects what they pay for energy. So if you think of, if you see the load profile of the entire grid, it doesn't look the same way a house does. It is low at night, and in the morning it starts to go up. Midday it peaks, and it kind of does this little thing where it goes up again in the afternoon when everybody gets home, and then it slowly tapers off into night, and there's low demand. So time of use rates are a way for them to charge you more for energy when it's more expensive for them, when they have to have more plants online and getting energy from peaker plants and a lot of different places. So batteries, excuse me, I'll talk about this real quick. So just as an example, this is a less aggressive time of use rate. In California and New Hampshire, you're seeing more aggressive ones. But there's an optional time of use rate in Eversource, just to kind of give you some perspective. In summer, during peak hours, the electricity would cost around roughly 24 cents per kilowatt hour, and in off-peak, it would be 5 cents a kilowatt hour. If only you could find a way to store all that cheap electricity at night and use it during the day. But you can't. So that's where the batteries come in. During off-peak hours, late at night, you would just get energy from the grid, and you would trickle charge your batteries. And then when the energy gets really expensive, you would just take the minimum amount of energy that you needed off the grid and use the battery, the cheap power inside of your battery to offset the rest of your loads. Now, the actual kilowatt hours that you're getting out of the battery in this situation are a little bit more expensive than the lowest rate would indicate, because you lose some round-trip efficiency. So if you're paying 8 cents a kilowatt hour during the off-peak, it's probably costing you about 10 cents a kilowatt hour coming out of the battery, plus the cost of the battery. So keep that in mind. I'm going to talk just real quick about off-grid systems, but I'm not going to go into depth because they're kind of minority when it comes to battery systems. Off-grid systems, you would have a PV array, just like we talked about with the DC grid interconnected system, instead of a battery bank. This is incorrect. It should say battery-based inverter. And it would draw power off of your battery banks and feed your loads. And you would probably, if you were going to live off-grid, you would need some sort of backup generator. Designing an off-grid system, again, can get quite tricky because you are essentially designing a power plant for yourself. And if you are designing a power plant for a grid, you're not designing it for the average amount of power that grid's going to need. You have to design it for the maximum amount of power that grid would ever need. And that includes in the wintertime. So as you can see, it gets kind of messy if you're designing an off-grid system. You need a pretty big storage system and a pretty big solar array. In addition to that, if you're running a generator on site and you care at all about carbon emissions, an on-site generator does not benefit from the economies of scale that a large natural gas General Electric turbine in a power plant would benefit from. So you're getting, it's roughly 10 times the carbon emissions per kilowatt hour produced. So it is not a greener way to go, unless the alternative is an off-grid system that has a diesel generator, in which case it is way greener. And so I'm going to sit down, and Jamie's going to talk a little bit about incentives.
Does anyone else have questions for him?
Question. Have you seen the ice batteries that are being used in like California?
I have not seen those. There's a lot of new different types of battery. Are you familiar with those?
That's a reverse thermal storage system where you use a condenser to essentially store energy in ice. Is that it?
Yeah.
Oh, and then you would like power air conditioning load.
You make ice when it's hot out, when the sun's out, and you cool the building later on when it's...
I have actually heard of that, but I don't know a lot about it.
I've got a question about using these batteries. What is the fatigue factor? In other words, you pay so much for a battery, you expect to get so much energy out of it, but there is a diminution of capacity. It depends on probably discharge, number of cycles.
Sure. Okay.
What is the question?
He's wondering about the fatigue factor of a battery over its lifespan. with a PV array, for example, this kind of has the same thing. You would lose about 0.5% of its production efficiency per year, and that kind of drops off at the end of its life after 25 years. With a battery, I have looked everywhere to figure this out and have not come up with a lot of answers. If Jamie has an answer, it's going to make it look like I'm not very good at searching. But
looks like we don't communicate in our company, but in fact, this is part of the process. Sorry. So my name is Jamie Leef, and I do a variety of things at Sunbug, and one of them is that we have a variety of commercial and residential battery systems that we're installing today. And to answer your question, every battery chemistry has a different profile for how its use will affect its life. The off-grid cabin, traditional lead-acid, renewable energy batteries that look like car batteries tend to like to sit. They want to be fully charged, but they don't want to be fully discharged. So you might say it's got 100 amp hours, but you can only use the top half of that capacity on a regular basis, because if you draw too much energy out of it, it starts to fatigue the battery a lot. So they're rated in depth of discharge and number of cycles. And every battery manufacturer will give you a chart that says, depending on how fast you discharge and how deep you discharge and how regularly you cycle that, you'll get a life. So there's not an easy answer to that. Lithium-ion batteries, one of the reasons they're very popular is that they don't have that kind of like a material memory in them. They can be 100% discharged. They can sit at 40%, for instance, without having any chemical imbalance happen. They can discharge and charge very quickly. And so if you use that feature, if they're a very active battery, you can rate them on a cycle life like that. But if you're using it for backup power once a year for a day over 10 years, that has a very different life profile. Point being, it's how you use it and what the chemistry is. Is that a good enough answer?
I looked into the original Powerwall warranty, and it wasn't very impressive. That is to say, I was concerned about the investment, return on investment, given those parameters.
Batteries have probably way less life than PV systems do. We think of PV as being 25 to 35 years for the materials to stay functioning on your roof, and like the off-grid cabin batteries were like 5-year life, and the lithiums are often given a 10-year service life. But again, what's the condition of use?
What about the aqueous?
I believe that Aqueon is giving a 10-year warranty under their preferred load profile.
70% depth of discharge for 10 years. I think is what they said.
Yeah, you need to flesh that sentence out with more like cycles, etc.
Yeah, sure.
So the aqueous hybrid ion batteries are very slow batteries. As an example, if you try to pull a lot of energy out of them very quickly, the actual level of power diminishes, and the number of kilowatt hours you get diminishes. But and so that would be in the like C1 to C2 kind of range, meaning if it's a 10 kilowatt hour battery, C1 is 10 kilowatts going out right now. But if you slow that down and draw that battery out over like 20 hours, you'll get twice the amount of kilowatt hours. And you'd be drawing it at a low power range. Backup power, perfect application. Lithiums do really well for that demand response thing, where you've got these, you're in an office building. In the morning, the lights go on, the computers go on, and then the elevator goes on. And then it goes on again. And you want that big power spike that's very quick. You want a rapid acting battery. Lithium ion is doing that job very well. For backup power, it functions that way. It's just that it's lithium. it's expensive, it's kind of toxic, and there's other options out there. Is there also a question about that whole topic? Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about incentives. Many parts of the big picture view of the electric grid in the United States have thought about the problem that there is very little storage in the supply chain of electricity. And recently there was a report commissioned by the State of Charge report. I recommend if you're interested in storage, it's on the Massachusetts DOER website. There's an executive summary that's only 10 pages, and the full report is like, I can't remember, 70 or 100. And it talks about a couple fundamental issues with the grid. One great analogy is that in the supply chain of food in our country, you think about farm distribution of basic agricultural products, food processing, distribution in a supermarket, and your refrigerator. There's a large amount of storage buffer built into that. Something like 20 to 40% of the supply chain has storage involved in it. In the electric grid, there's like zero. The entire electric grid distribution system is built on the idea of delivering 100% peak power at any moment, at all moments, which is incredibly inefficient. And that's why this time of use billing rate issue becomes something that utilities really value, because the cost of the kilowatt hours to deliver to you at those peak times is really high, like $1,000 a kilowatt hour in Massachusetts. So storage can help solve that problem by adding a buffer tank, effectively, to allow fluctuations in demand to be leveled out. And one of the great things about this study is that it tried to actually monetize what that benefit might be by saying, I don't know how to operate the slides. Which one does what? That one. Okay. They have this wonderfully unreadable chart, which is a stack of values in the supply chain that can be delivered to ratepayers by adding storage. For instance, reducing the amount of maintenance cost on componentry which gets stressed by delivering higher peaks, reducing the number of power plants that need to get built at the periphery of the grid distribution network in order to maintain voltage and frequency, which if you think about a big central power plant, the people out over there get lower quality power usually. So adding a storage unit, which could be small, could be the size of this room, out at that grid periphery can allow the grid to actually be more even. Even deploying lots of distributed scale storage resources might eliminate a peaker power plant needing to be built, which takes a lot of resources and burns a lot of carbon. So the state says, hey, there's this huge amount of ratepayer value that we could get by building what they analyze as an appropriate amount of storage in the hundreds of megawatts. And right now, our utility billing structure on the retail and also on the wholesale level doesn't really have a way for storage developers to monetize any of that value. So it's actually, as a battery installer, I could sell you a battery, but if you're getting net metering, then with your solar system, it doesn't give you any monetary value, so you don't want to do it. So in order to jumpstart storage deployment, they say, there's a chunk of money that we can spend in incentives on public money that ratepayers would actually recoup by all of these grid benefits that would ultimately reduce the cost of energy to everybody. And that'll be an interim step down the line if we change our wholesale and retail electric rate structure, then the incentives to build storage systems will just be built in. Of course, you'll be built in a way that would make it obvious, of course, I want to put a battery here. And you get the revenue streams from providing these grid services as an end user. So soon, we will have battery incentives. They're going to come out first in some pilot projects that the state is doing, and then in January, roughly, of next year, there's a new solar incentive framework for the entire state, replacing our SREC program. And that framework will have an additional incentive if you put solar on, and you put a storage system in with it, you'll get an additional amount of money in revenue from the incentive structure. Yes?
Those benefits aren't realized by the mere deployment of batteries. Those benefits are realized by the use of batteries in particular ways, at particular moments, to derive those benefits. So peak shaving works if people are discharging their batteries during peak.
Yes.
But if they're not using the batteries in such a way to generate those grid or social benefits, then we're not gaining those benefits. And so I wonder, is the new solar program that the governor is offering, it's helping pay for batteries, but is it requiring the use of the battery in such a way as to generate those benefits, or does it not get that far?
Did everybody hear that? Okay, I love that. So there's a couple, let me back up a little bit. One of the interesting things about battery systems is that unlike normal solar, which is grid-tied solar is just kind of dumb. You just turn it on and it puts out power whenever there's sun. Batteries are highly configurable. There's all these applications that we've outlined, and they are literally, you go into your little software, you reprogram your battery, you tell it, I want to charge up overnight and discharge during the day. That may or may not have any grid benefit at all. As a matter of fact, that might actually be opposite of a particular grid benefit that somebody's looking for. Solar self-consumption. That's actually kind of a grid benefit because one of the problems with deploying renewable energy is that it tends to peak, not always at times when it's really needed in the grid. And there can be imbalances that our solar customers end up paying a large amount of money to solve when we're doing commercial-sized solar projects, and Eversource or National Grid requires our customers to spend $300,000 to upgrade a substation. If we just had storage that would do self-consumption, we'd avoid a lot of messing with the grid. So the use case is very important. There are some existing revenue streams, particularly this demand management problem, which incentivize battery deployers and end users to program their batteries for a use which is in fact grid beneficial. That's because the rate structure is designed to produce a better behavior. And in Massachusetts, the sort of in desire to restructure utility rates is a lot about driving better behavior. Right now, there isn't a lot, especially in the residential market, there's really not much driving your electricity behavior. Basically, you build a house, you get a big pipe from the utility, and you just use all the power you want, whenever you want it. Yeah, there's no behavioral modification involved in that. So, to answer your point, right now we don't really have the legal authority to force anybody to do what is most beneficial. But we do have the opportunity to identify use cases where there's more benefit and to focus incentives towards those use cases. So one of them is a solar+storage incentive. And the way that that works is that your battery must be mostly charged by solar. And we'll talk about that in a sec for why. And that promotes solar self-consumption, it promotes distributed generation resources, and that's the grid benefit that that particular incentive is targeted to. Down the line, you're going to see more on some of the other sides. Does that seem like a fair answer?
As much as you got.
Yeah. question is that if somebody has solar, they end up paying less for electricity in their house. Generally.
They have that cost. Are they paying more for installation of the solar? I guess my question is, I have a big tree on my house. I can't put solar on it. So I can't utilize that opportunity my neighbor has that has solar that has a lot less that they're paying for or not paying for electricity. So there seems to be an inequity associated with that house that has a lot of solar opportunity and that house that doesn't have much solar opportunity, and they're not having the opportunity to reduce their costs. I guess is that
Sure.
you understand my question?
A little bit. Let me try to answer it and you tell me if I got it. There are many things that we can all do to reduce our carbon footprint and our energy costs. First would be energy efficiency, period. You're all in the passive house group, right? That's the whole point, drive the loads down. So that's not accessible to everybody either. Maybe you're a renter. You can't change your building, right? You could potentially buy a share in a community solar farm and essentially pay for some renewable energy to be put onto the grid, and by a regulatory structure actually get some economic benefit out of that, even though it's not in your house. Community solar is a very cool idea that really can allow that benefit of the fact that there's incentives and financial benefits to be able to be given to you even though you can't do it on your house. Does that reasonably answer your question?
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking as time goes on here, people are going to get a little concerned that four houses in a row that don't have to pay any utilities, and then the third, fifth, sixth, and seventh house are paying, $1,000 a month.
Yes.
So there's going to be some concern about that down the road.
Right. Well, the people who are lowering their utility bill by doing solar are doing it because they spent thousands of dollars to do it. It's not free. You buy a power plant. When you put solar on your house, you are buying a power plant and installing it on your house. It's not a trivial thing to do. It costs a lot of money. You may finance it, so you may pay for it over time. You may actually get your power at a reduced rate than what you're currently paying from the utility. But it's not just like free.
No, I understand, but there's going to be somebody's going to need to have a balance.
Your concern is that the people with PV on the roof are still using the grid infrastructure, that they're not making a contribution to support
Yeah, basically.
because they're not paying as high energy.
A perfectly good point. It's quite reasonable to say, I'm sorry, I'm backing up here, but it's quite reasonable to say everybody should pay a basic fee for being connected to the grid, right? Sure. And in fact, the current regulatory filings from most utilities in the state are asking for exactly that. Like, hey, you've got tons of solar on your house, but you're still using the resource, so you should pay at least some kind of monthly fee for the maintenance of the grid. Sure, that's a very reasonable thing to do. And you probably see that more and more. Net metering is cool structure, basic service fee, probably coming down the line soon. As are residential demand fees. Coming back to that idea where you put in an electric service in your house, you've got this huge pipe, which you can use at will. You can just turn everything in your house on right now, and there's no penalty for that, but there probably will be. So the most recent Eversource filing is Eversource National Grid, I can't remember, I think it's Eversource, is asking for some level of residential demand fee. And that may not come for some number of years or whatever, but that's actually a really good thing if you think about, you don't like that idea.
Terrible idea.
Yeah.
Number one, residential demand across homes is not particularly well correlated, unlike industrial and commercial demand. Number two, residential customers don't have the tools or the knowledge to manage that demand, which is very different than an industrial customer. So I work for a firm fight these proposals, and we are actually fighting the Eversource.
Right.
As it turns out, because residential customers have no idea how to manage their minute-by-minute demand.
A lot of commercials don't either.
But
Exactly.
but at $4,000 a month, they could hire someone to look into it. When the difference in residential demand is $50 a month, customers have no ability to manage this, and so it's penalizing some customers who happen to use their electric water heater at the same time they're microwaving breakfast and their daughter's drying her hair, and that's just sort of absurd, right? So I think actually residential demand charges are going to get pushed back on quite hard because residential customers simply have no ability to manage it.
I think there's a really good advocacy perspective for that, and so, yeah, in many ways I agree with you. To take the other point, though, everybody has a stake in learning, either being a market being created for tools that don't exist right now. You know, it goes back to that, if you can measure it, you can manage it problem. Nobody's paying attention to instantaneous power use. We should be. It's a huge grid problem. So maybe whacking residential customers with a fee is the wrong way to go about starting that. Very fair. But somehow we imagine that this is going to have to shift. We've been living in a world of relatively seamless utility delivery of copious amounts of very carbon expensive power. At some point we have to learn a different way to operate our grid. So,
and time of use rates are a way to get a sort of a similar behavioral shift in a way that residential customers can much more easily understand.
Yes, you can set the delay cycle on your dishwasher and your washing machine. You can think about LED lighting.
Programmable thermostats.
Yes.
So, Jamie, you have about 10 minutes. I'd also like, we were, as Passive House Massachusetts is going to be covering more advocacy topics this year. And so there will be opportunities to continue the conversation. I would like to definitely connect with you. We had Nathan Phelps from Vote Solar speak here about a year ago, and he gave us a really good preview or background of the changing regulatory outlook and also its possible impact on residential customers. That was interesting. You know, he's always good.
Yeah.
So maybe time to get him back, and we could do a panel discussion or a cage match or whatever.
Yeah. I like the cage match idea. One of the things to think about is that there's some really important advocacy to be done right now about the difference in valuation between the new residential and new commercial solar incentives, which are very upside down if you think about the fact that most of the people who work in the solar industry actually work on residential scale jobs. It's where most of the job growth is. It's where most of the actual operation of solar companies comes from. And the new incentive is heavily skewed towards much larger commercial systems. Residential systems are going to be way less generous. And there's a lot of going back and forth about trying to fix that right now, and it's something that if you're interested in solar policy advocacy, I'd say get involved in thinking about that. Yes?
One of the things that shifts cost is generation and storage of DC power, which is then used for rapid charging of vehicles.
Yeah.
And a situation where you don't turn your DC into AC because level 2, level 3 charging can use DC much better. Can you comment some on what financial benefits are coming and opportunities are coming out of them?
There are several people who are talking about the idea of integrating your battery charging situation with your car and your house. I got got a good product suggestion from Mike. It seems like a place where some work can be done. DC-only microgrids of any scale, including getting your home battery to connect to your car battery, are theoretically really easy to do, and it's just a matter of a market, a UL-listed product, and somebody really deciding they want to do that. One of the problems with using your car battery for your house, particularly for backup power applications, is that if it's an ice storm and you're like, I'm going to stay in my house, at a certain point you might say, oh crap, now I need to leave, and now your car's dead because you used up running your pump or whatever. So and these batteries are small. Like, I mean, my house is extremely efficient. I use very little power. But if I had a Tesla car, I could maybe stay there for like 3 days. If you have forced hot air heat, you're going to blow through a battery real quick.
Yeah, I'm thinking of going mainly the other way. I mean, we've got potentially 300 people on a site with a certain number of vehicles to be charged.
Yes.
So we would like to make it as inexpensive as possible for them to use that power DC directly instead of taking grid power and then changing it from AC to DC. And we're just kind of looking for an opportunity. We're looking for somebody to talk to.
You're talking about using solar for the car charging directly. Yeah.
You'd save like 15% efficiency because you wouldn't be converting it to AC.
Yes, it's a reasonable thing to imagine. Except you remember those PV load profile or PV production graphs he was showing, where like one day you have a beautiful solar bell curve, the next day you get this. And if you don't have the grid and you arrive to the car charging station and there's no sun, or today because a lot of our systems are producing nothing, if you don't have that input, it's a problem. But you could theoretically, I don't have a product today, you could connect a DC to DC battery charging system. I think most of the cars, I haven't looked at the car chargers.
You would need quite a battery bank to do it because, especially for if you want to charge a car slowly, it would be fine.
Right.
But if you wanted to do any sort of level 2, level 3 charging, you'd need to. Level 3 charging is something like,
Like
what's it, 40 or 50? Yeah.
It's hard to get them.
Yeah.
The danger and the gear necessary for using DC add a lot of cost as well, because the danger level goes up.
I don't think
DC wiring is becoming much more widely accepted as a general use case for wiring things in general, partly because solar. So like all the solar systems you see are, roughly in a 350 volt DC world of wiring. There's whole sections of the electric code that deal with that. I don't necessarily think it's more dangerous.
Breakers that are necessary to break, like in a panel, see a regular square D when you're using AC.
Yeah.
The size of that breaker would be much bigger and much more expensive to give you protection.
Actually, they're just designed differently. So like DC contactor breakers in like 1,000 volt DC systems that are running like 8, 10, 20 amps, they're like that big.
Yeah, they're pretty small.
So it's just there's a lot of subtlety to that. There's one last really important slide. I'm not going to get into this. There is currently federal investment tax credit legislation, which provides a 30% tax credit for renewable energy systems like wind, solar, geothermal, thermal systems. If your battery that you're installing with your renewable energy system is charged, 70% of the throughput for that charge comes from your renewable energy system, you can take the ITC on that battery. It makes it very affordable to take 30% off the cost. Otherwise, there's no real battery incentive right at the moment. You just buy them.
Do you expect that incentive will change with the new changes in incentives or not?
Battery storage in the grid is not exactly a red state, blue state issue. It's really a very large national infrastructure issue. So the word in the federal policy world is that a proposal for a battery storage tax credit has a pretty decent chance of passing in the current federal legislative space, except for the fact that it's a tax credit, which, with many conservative politicians, further complicating the tax code with all these stupid tax credits is not what they want. They want simplified tax. So there's like policy issues about that, but we don't. it seems like a reasonable thing that might happen. We might get a federal ITC for storage, primarily because there's so much grid infrastructure upgrade that can happen if we do. So.
Call your congressman and tell him that you support HR 5350.
The main reason I advocate for it is really for the deployment of renewables. I do think you can get into a lot of complex discussions about how this really affects ratepayers, whether or not people are programming their batteries for the true effect. But it's undoubtedly true that wind, solar, tidal, biomass, there's all these energy systems where storage is really helpful. Any more questions about storage? Right. It's 8 o'clock. Perfect.
What's that? No. Did you mention about the book party, Nick?
So Nessie's, after Nessie opening night, the Nessie Building Energy Conference on March 7th, we're gonna, the different passive house groups in New England, passive house, Massachusetts,
So, me recording this, do you mind if I
Connecticut,
make
we
it
published a book, and we're gonna have a book release party at, Rosa Mexicano, across the street from Nessie, and that'll be at 6:45. So after Nessie opening night, if you want to come join us, you can register online at our
Maybe
mass, phmass.org. That's our Pass House website. Or you can go on there and get tickets. So it'll have dinner, and then we'll have all the different passive house groups who publish this book of all the different projects in New England, and